Well, first I'll say thank you for those of you that have come out. I always tell people when they're in Israel to kiss the ground for me, because I truly believe this is sacred ground, and we need to remember that. What happened on October 7th is not sacred. What happened on October 7th was pure evil, and what happened on October 7th can never be forgotten. Mr. Mayor, thank you for having me again. I will tell you, last time I came with Pastor Hagee and Kufi, and it was at the time that there were strikes, and I thank you for your leadership. Danny Danone has been a dear friend of mine. Obviously, we went through major battles together at the United Nations, but the friendship that we've held on is really through the fact that we want to see peace, but more than that, we want to see a friendship between the United States and Israel that's unwavering, because we know we have the same enemies. And with that, you've been a real fighter and a real friend, and I thank you for that, and thank you for having us back. I want to take you through a little bit of what we saw today. You know, we started the day going through a kibbutz. And when you know the kibbutz, I've always felt it's like a family. It's a small family that they love each other, they see each other, they raise their kids together, they all take care of each other. And as we went through that kibbutz, what we saw was home after home after home that wasn't just destroyed, but every house we walked into was a total nightmare, because you saw a family that struggled for their life. You saw families who were trying to protect their kids. You saw families where grandparents were there, and the only thing they had to keep themselves from the terrorists was trying to hold the door as tight as they could and not let the terrorists get in. The terrorists tried to shoot. If that didn't work, they tried to pull the door. If that didn't work, they tried to burn it. And the things that happened in those homes, in that community, is something no one should ever even think of. These were people who were burned alive. These were children who were killed. These were women that were raped. All of that, house after house. And what was very clear was they knew what they were doing. They knew exactly which houses to go to. They knew exactly who was going to be in those houses. This was incredibly orchestrated, and it was very detailed. Then we went to the concert site. And to go to the concert site, all I could think about was my kids. Because my kids could have been at that concert. And what you saw was where there were a lot of kids that should have been having fun and listening to music and loving their life. Out of nowhere, they heard gunshots, they saw parachutes coming in, and the next thing they knew, it was sheer terror. And where you look at this concert site, there was no place to hide. The trees weren't thick, they were thin. If a terrorist saw them, they were going to capture them. And we heard from the courage of one survivor who will be traumatized for the rest of her life. And the reason she has chosen to speak is because people are denying what she experienced at that concert site. When she was hiding, she heard girls being raped. She heard them being dismembered and mutilated. Men were dismembered and mutilated. She heard screams, and then she heard a shot, and then she heard nothing. And screams and a shot and nothing, over and over and over again for hours. And to come out and see her friends, her Israeli sisters and brothers, murdered and dismembered and killed. That's her life. That'll be the rest of her life. Then we went to a military base that had been overtaken. Very telling, because the terrorists knew to go to the bases first. The terrorists knew to get to the bases because no one could protect the civilians if they did that. And what happened in those bases, you saw the video. I was in the room where those girls were being held, the video that just came out, where people were murdered in that room. The fact that those girls were told they were going to be raped, were told that they were going to be impregnated, were told that they were going to be killed in this small space where they sat, terrified for their lives, looking at their dead colleagues around them. And then we went to the war room, where the terrorists knew which room it was. And that's where all the surveillance was happening. And when they tried to shoot, they couldn't get in the room. Then they tried to burn it. And those heroes stayed at that base in the name of helping their Israeli brothers and sisters. And they burned to death right there. That's what this day has been. And so to my Israeli brothers and sisters, what I say to you is we hear you. We see you. We hurt with you. And we mourn every single life that's been lost. For those families who have hostages that have been taken, we won't stop praying or fighting until we see every one of them come home and get their bodies back if they're not still with us, because every family deserves that. But what I will tell all Israelis, don't listen to the media bites that you hear. America is with you. Americans are with you. We are connected to you. And what happened on October 7th hurt us all. It's still personal. 1,200 people were brutally murdered. 32 of them were Americans. 8 American hostages. But those numbers blend because we're all together in this. And so what I will tell to the people of Israel, let's not forget what happened on October 7th. Let's not close it out of our minds, because Hamas has said they're gonna do it again. We owe it to make sure it never happens again. To go look, this is not about pointing blame or fingers. I don't look at that. I want to know, how do we secure the people of Israel and make sure it doesn't happen again? There's 2 goals. Get every single hostage home as safely as possible, and make sure that Israelis never have to fear their security, that they always feel secure. And I will use my voice to help make that happen as much as humanly possible, because I think it's that important. To my American brothers and sisters, Sunday is our religious day. This happened during Shabbat, their religious day. Imagine if you woke up on a Sunday morning where you feel you're closest to God and threat comes in. It's literally at your doorstep. It's literally in the safest room in your home. It's literally happening to your neighbors. And you watch all of this unfold. Now imagine if this happened in America. What would we feel like? What would we be going through? What sadness would we have? What anger would we have? We wouldn't let it go. We wouldn't stop. We would want to know who did it. We would want to know how they did it. We would want to know why they did it. And we'd want to know who our friends are. And we never want to forget who our enemies are. To put this in perspective for the American people and for the rest of the world, 3,000 Hamas terrorists broke the barrier. 3,000 on Israel's holiest day during Shabbat. They broke the barrier, but that's not all who came. Thousands of Palestinian citizens came and robbed and killed and murdered and went back and came back again. The reason this is important is you hear about Hamas, but there's an entire generation of Palestinians who are now entrenched with that Hamas ideology. Now, what I pray for Palestinians is that they get Hamas out of their lives. But what I will tell you for Israelis, when they say they're going to do it again, when they told one woman they'd be back 2 years from now, take them at their word. What I saw was very detailed. It's clear that there were informants. It's clear that this took years to plan. But make no mistake, this is one of the most brutal massacres I have ever experienced, heard about, seen the damages of. It was orchestrated by Iran. It was helped with Russian intelligence. And it was fueled by money from China. Don't deny that. China's been funding Iran the entire time. Russia's intelligence helped them know where everything was. Iran helped get them trained. So this isn't Hamas. Look at these. These are all murderers and accomplices. If we really mean it's never going to happen again, we have to be honest and truthful with ourselves. Who did this? That's the first step. Then how did it happen? How was it that we didn't have the intelligence we needed? Or were we so arrogant to think this wouldn't happen? And I'll tell Israelis, we were like that on 9/11. We never thought anything like that could happen. When something like this happens, it shouldn't be personal for just Israelis. This should be personal for Americans. Why? These heroic Israeli soldiers are fighting America's enemies. They didn't just say death to Israel, they're saying death to America. We have to wake up to that. This isn't going to go away by some political agreement. This isn't going to go away just because somebody wants it to. This is only going to go away when we acknowledge the truth. Every one of us has to be responsible. And for all those countries who decided to recognize a Palestinian state, do you know what that felt like here in Israel? You just gave credit to Hamas and all that they did. For all those looking at the ICC and ICJ, right before we landed, there were strikes in Tel Aviv. Why? Because the ICC and ICJ just emboldened Hamas. They just gave them everything they needed to know. And when the friends of Israel back off, the terrorists move in. That's a fact. So instead of emboldening terrorists, why don't we embolden our brothers and sisters in Israel? This war would have been over if we had just done what we were supposed to do from the beginning. America should do everything we can to support Israel in this process, because Israel's doing the hard work for us. They're fighting America's enemies. So we have, over the next few days, we've got meetings, all types of elected officials to really get down into what's happening, how it happened, how they're fixing it. But today was such an important day because we talked to real people. And we talked to people who've experienced it. And I'll tell you, every Israeli family feels this because they all know someone. They all mourn someone, and it's not over. We're watching our Israeli soldiers now go in and fight, knowing they may not come back. So if there was ever a time that we needed unity between those countries who believe in freedom and democracy and put faith in life, now is that time. There is no gray between Hamas and Iran and the Palestinians that took place and freedom-loving citizens in the world who want peace. There's no gray there. So pick a side. I know where my side is. My side's going to be the one where we know if we all want to have moral clarity, we have to speak for those who can no longer speak. We have to fight for those who can no longer fight. This shouldn't have happened. But we can never let this happen again. And if you think it's only going to be in Israel, if we are arrogant enough, this could absolutely happen in America too. And that's the moral of this story, is I hope that everybody takes that away. We will continue to talk to you as we go through this. I know I took a while to spell that out, but I want you to feel what I felt and I want you to see what I saw, and we'll keep putting things out there so that you know it. But right now, I hope that the people of Israel, we love you and we stand with you, and everything that you are doing, you're doing right. It's everybody else that's wrong in this, not the people of Israel. And that's what we have to be honest enough to tell ourselves, is that Israel's in the right. They're defending themselves against what was a brutal attack. And everybody else needs to step in line and thank Israel for fighting the real fight. So we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. רגע. אנחנו עושים עכשיו סבב שאלות. אני ואושי מחלקים את השאלות. כולם יקבלו. ביבי בבקשה. ביבי בבקשה.
Ambassador Haley, first of all, thank you so much for being here and your support. Now that you're seeing in person all these atrocities, do you think the Biden administration policies towards Israel during the war are justifiable? And the second question, do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu should accept the Republican Party's invitation to speak before the Congress, even though most of the Democrats oppose it? וחבר הכנסת גנון.
Ooh, let's go one question at a time. Can we do it? Because I am a proud American, and I think it's very important to never talk negatively about an American president when you're on foreign soil. So this is not going to be a time where I'm going to say anything negative about the president. What I will tell you is what America should do. And what America needs to understand is, if Israel's fighting our enemies, how can we not help them? The sure way to not help Israel is to withhold weapons. The sure way to not help Israel is to praise the ICC or the ICJ or any of those that are condemning Israel instead of condemning what happens. America needs to do whatever Israel needs and stop telling them how to fight this war. Until you've lived it, you can't say how to fight it. You're either a friend or you're not a friend. Israel doesn't need us to tell them what to do. They've got a good fighting force. They're going through enough. The last thing they need is pressure from their friends. If there's anything I've known over the years, Israel values human life just as much as America does. Just as much. And what they are having to do now is surgical. To go in there and make sure they eliminate Hamas. You'll remember when this happened, I said finish them. They need to finish Hamas. Don't stop until they finish. But also make sure that that security is intact so that it never happens again from Hamas or anybody else. And so I will always push America to do what I think is the right thing, which is you stand by your friends and you don't waver on that. And that's what I think is really important. In terms of an invitation for Netanyahu to go to Congress, I always think when one of America's best friends has the opportunity to speak to America, I always welcome it, and I hope that he does that. And I think it's important for Republicans and Democrats to hear what he has to say.
ניצן. רגע, גיא, יש פה סדר.
I think you had a question for Danny though, right?
אפשר לשאול את דני?
כן.
חבר הכנסת דנון, השר איזנקוט אמר כעת בוועדת החוץ והביטחון שאחרי סיום הפעילות ברפיח צריך לחתור לסיום המלחמה. אנחנו יודעים שזו עמדת הממשל האמריקאי. האם ישראל צריכה להמתין לחילופי ממשל בארצות הברית כדי לבחון כיצד להמשיך את הלחימה?
אנחנו לא צריכים להתייחס לבחירות בארצות הברית. אנחנו צריכים להמשיך להילחם כמה שיותר חזק וכמה שיותר מהר. אני חושב שהשר איזנקוט צריך להבין שהממשלה הזאת הולכת להכרעה. אם הוא בוחר להישאר בממשלה או לא, זה בחירה שלו. הממשלה הולכת להכרעה, וצה"ל צריך לפעול בהרבה יותר נחישות וכוח כדי להגיע להכרעה מהירה.
ניצן.
Yes.
The U.S. administration was
Where am
opposed
I?
to a major Rafah operation.
I'm sorry, can you start again?
Yeah. The U.S. administration was always opposed to a major Rafah operation. Do you share this view, and should Israel push forward in Rafah? And Donald Trump recently did not rule out stopping U.S. aid to Israel. Do you agree with him?
So in reference to Rafah, when you're fighting a war and your goal is to finish Hamas, you have to go where Hamas is. Rafah is a central area to where we know Hamas is. So Israel has to go there. In terms of innocent Palestinians, which is the concern that the world has, right? Why isn't Egypt taking them? Why isn't Qatar taking them? Why aren't any of the Arab countries taking them? Because if you think they're in so much danger, you should take them, right? But the reason they're not taking them is they don't know who's Hamas and who's not. And I'll tell you this, I fought a huge fight back in 2018 to totally eliminate the funding of UNRWA. And it was a hard fight. But the U.S. stopped funding UNRWA because I knew then when we saw the UNRWA schools, when we saw what was happening, they would not fix the things I said needed to happen. And when you look at the list of UNRWA principals, teachers, staffers that were part of Hamas, when you look at the fact that the Hamas data centers were getting their electricity because UNRWA schools were on top of them, that's how surgical this is. So when Israel's trying to eliminate Hamas, they have to go into these areas. If those Arab countries are that worried, they should take them. They should go and take whatever Palestinian citizens. But if they're not willing to take them, no one needs to say anything. I know Israel's doing everything they can not to hurt an innocent life. But this is war. Israel didn't start this. But Israel has to finish it.
יונתן רווה, כאן 11 בבקשה.
What do you think about the idea that the Palestinian Authority would govern Gaza on after the war?
It is not my place to tell Israel what their policy should be, any more than it's Israelis' place to tell Americans what our policy should be. What I think is important is Israelis should feel secure. And whatever it takes to feel secure, whatever it takes for them to know this will never happen again, that's the decision that the Israeli government should make. But I don't think Americans should make that decision. I don't think anybody outside of Israel should make that decision. I think only Israelis know what will make them feel secure, and they should do whatever that takes.
איה, גל"צ.
Last week you said you will vote for Donald Trump for president. I wanted to ask you, in what ways do you think Trump will be a better president for Israel at this moment? And if you think that's the case.
Well, I know when I worked with him prior, we had a strong America. That was the goal. The goal was to make sure we knew who our friends were and we knew who our enemies were. And I think the reason that he and I worked together well during that time was because he let me do my job, which was to call out our enemies, but we never forgot our friends, which is why we stood with Israel. And all you have to do is look at the fact that he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and acknowledged the truth. He allowed me to defund UNRWA. When we went and tried to go and condemn Hamas and name them a terrorist organization, he let me put that resolution forward. Now, the UN didn't fully, well, for the record, we won the majority of the vote, but they changed it to 2/3 vote at the time. But all of those things, he allowed for strong foreign policy. I hope in his next administration that he remembers who his friends are, who his enemies are, and don't let that waver, because that's what's important. And not let the idea, we all want a fast war. No one wants a long war. But it's not about fast as much as do it right. Do it right in the first place so that you never have to do it again.
Yeah, John?
Yes.
Ambassador, thank you so much for coming to Israel. I'm with All Israel News and TBN, the most watched Christian television
Yes.
network in America. Your relationship with President Trump was very, very strong, and you guys got so much done, as you just alluded to. It's been a little testy and intense and sometimes even personal, but you seem to be making the first step to saying, how can we work together? And especially about Israel and the Middle East policy, Iran, these issues are... Talk about a little bit more about your relationship with him and how you think the party can come together, because right now you're picking up 15, 20, 30% that may not go to him, and that would mean a second Biden administration.
I mean, look, smart politics is to make sure you're not personal, right? And so I've always been able to take the emotion and the personal part out of politics, because that's the only way you could do the right thing. When you start to get personal, when you start to get emotional, that's when you're not making good policy. This is all about policy. And when you look at the policies of the two, I very much am on one side. It's not even close. I want to know that we're going to have the backs of our allies and hold our enemies to account. I want to know that we're going to protect freedom at all costs, that we're going to protect capitalism at all costs. I want to make sure that we have less debt, not more. It's, you know, I've made this answer very clear. So that's where I'm looking at. That's who I'm voting for. That's the way I see it.
Are you optimistic about the relationship? Because it looks like a Grand Canyon at the moment, but...
I mean, it's not personal for me. It's not about... We worked very well together at the UN. We had we sparred in a campaign. If I thought either one of them was great, I wouldn't have run. I ran because I thought I could do a better job. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's not personal for me. This is about America. It's about a strong America. It's about a strong Israel. It's about having the backs of our friends. It's about holding our enemies to account. And it's about us not having any chaos, because when you're distracted or you have chaos, bad things happen. We've got to get serious as a country. We've got to get focused as a country, and we have to get back to national security. No exceptions.
Thank you.
Daniel?
Thank you so much for being here. Yes. Daniel Cohen, I'm the Jerusalem correspondent for Newsmax. I think it means the world to Israelis. I'm Israeli and American, actually, both, but just the fact that you're here, your feet on the ground at Nova, at the kibbutzim, and with Danny as well. Danny, thank you for welcoming and for hosting. You did mention last week that you are voting for President Trump. I didn't hear you say you're endorsing him. You said you're voting for him, and you called President Biden's presidency more or less a catastrophe. So are you going to, is your plan to fully endorse President Trump, or what will you do going forward to make sure that you're voting for him, that he will be elected to help this election campaign?
I mean, right now, my focus is Israel. I gave my statement last week. That statement stands. I think that speaks for itself, that I don't think I need to add any more to it. This is the last thing I want to do, is come to Israel and talk about American politics. What I do want to do is come to Israel and make sure that the American people see what I see, hear what I hear, and understand the one flaw that I will say of Republicans and Democrats in America is they're not telling Americans why they should care about Israel. They're not telling Americans why they should care about Ukraine. They're just making the decision and allowing Americans to hear it in sound bites. That's not, Americans are smart. When you give them the information, when you tell them why they need to care, they do. And they deserve to hear it. And they haven't heard it. And so Danny had invited me during the campaign. It obviously wasn't a good time. And so I wanted to get here as soon as I could. And now my goal is to make sure that every American knows why we should care. We should care because Israel is fighting America's enemies. And that should be reason enough for us to do everything we can to support them.
Okay, Guy?
Yeah, that's right, from my point of view. So the International Court of Justice in The Hague on the weekend has ordered Israel to hold the operation in Rafah. And we haven't heard a clear voice from the Biden administration on whether they would veto that decision should it come to the UN Security Council. What do you make of that? And would that be any different under the Trump administration?
America should veto anything related to the ICC or the ICJ because they have no bearing They have no enforceability on it. It's the reason the U.S. is not a member of the ICC. And honestly, to see what came down, I thought I had seen it all at the United Nations, but this is disgusting. To go and talk about Israel in the same vein that you're talking about Hamas and what happened, there's nothing you can say but disgusting. And so I think America has an obligation to veto anything that comes forward. And on top of that, you look at what happened with Raisi, it couldn't have happened to a worse person. But the idea, America should, I would have walked out. You don't stand in a moment of silence for a murderer. You don't sit in a moment of silence for a murderer. You walk out and let the world know that that is not anything we're ever going to condone, accept, or sympathize over.
Ambassador Haley, Zach Anderson, Fox. One of the things you notice about being in Israel is the fence that surrounds Gaza. You said that on a Sunday in America, it could happen to us. We don't have a fence that's complete. We have an open border. There are thousands coming in from around the world. There's a bill that's stalled in the Senate, voices from both sides of the aisle saying that there should be a vote on it, but that they're making a political issue so that it can be ready for the election, for Trump's presidency. Should there be, if God forbid, an event like October 7th happens in America, acceptance of blame on both sides of the aisle that this issue, an issue of national security, was not addressed?
First of all, an American president should do everything in his power to make sure that that border is secure. That needs to happen. That hasn't happened yet. Congress should do everything in their power to secure the border. The fact that we have thousands of people coming through that aren't vetted, we know terrorists that we happen to get, this could happen. It's not far-fetched. It's not a scare tactic. They went and they used bombs to go and blow up parts of the fence. We're not even requiring them to do bombs. We're just saying, come on in, go wherever you want. We're not vetting. We don't know where they are. We don't know where they go. And oh, by the way, we're giving them a credit card so they can spend money with it. It's unbelievable what we're allowing to have happen in America. And the only reason that a president or a Congress would not secure the border is out of arrogance. Arrogance that they think that we're untouchable. We saw that on September 10th. We regretted that on September 12th.
So do you believe
Rachel.
we should have a vote?
First of all, Ambassador Haley, thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you.
My name is Rachel Stern, and I'm from the Press Service of Israel, TPSIL. And my question is, how do you think that the UN has contributed to a rise in global anti-Semitism? And are you shocked that so many people internationally refuse to believe what's happened here, what you've seen today?
I think if you look at anti-Semitism, it comes in different forms. I think when the United Nations doesn't call out anti-Semitism for what it is, you see the global community start to do it. I can see in America, if you look at our college campuses, that didn't just happen on its own. It happened because Arab money is funding our college campuses. And we need to get all foreign money out of our college campuses because they've been doing this for years. So there was no surprise there were suddenly protests on college campuses because they've been told over and over again certain things that aren't true. Now is a time for truth, not just in America, but in the world. Truth of who our friends are, who our enemies are, who the victims are, who the victims are not. And the reason why I wanted this to be said, and I'm going to say it over and over again, and I know it's controversial to say it, but I've always spoken hard truths. It was not just Hamas that did these murders. It was not just Hamas that did all of these atrocities, that created. Palestinians came over and contributed and were a part of this. Hear that. Palestinians came over and took hostages and robbed these homes and did things, and that needs to be told. That is why Israelis don't know who to trust and who not. If we were in the same shoes, we would worry. Anti-Semitism. Don't look at it as Israelis are doing anything wrong. All they're trying to do is defend themselves. In America, don't look at it as the Jewish community is trying to hurt the Palestinians. That's not the case. The Jewish community is or for people to be bothered as they're walking down the street or for things to happen. All everybody's saying is you should feel safe. And that's not too much to ask. And right now, the rise in anti-Semitism is making many people feel unsafe. And that's unacceptable in free countries. And Israel's a free country, America's a free country, the United Nations is not a free country, but it doesn't mean that our democracies of freedom should not be standing up and saying it's not the Israelis or the Jewish people we should be condemning. We need to be condemning Iran, Russia, who gave the intelligence, and China, who's funding it. Don't disregard the Palestinian citizens who took part in the brutal deaths of so many Israelis.
ערוץ 13, חג'בי.
If Trump offered you to be his running mate, do you accept the offer?
Trump has made it very clear that I am not, so it is not something, I don't think about things that aren't reality.
All right, guys, we're finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
השאלה בעברית בבקשה מר דרור. תחזור לגבי הביקור הזה.
You're saying that she believes that Russia and China were involved in October 7th. Do you agree with that?